in my experience at LAUFORG, each person in that group had a particular interest, as we all do. Mine was always, because of my background, I guess, in instrumentation. How could I capture actual data of scientific interest in the subject? And one of my earlier attempts was I built a device that could theoretically sit in the, say, the bedroom of someone who's thought they were abducted now and then, and wait and then start running a video camera with audio when something happened.
So Ron, welcome to the Rob Freeman UFO World Explorer channel. And I wondered if you could just introduce yourself, your full name and the name of your company, and give us a brief rundown on what actually got you started. How did you get started on all of this?
Well, I'm Ronald Olch. I have an extensive listing on LinkedIn if anybody wants to go and read all about that. I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science from UCLA. And from the UCLA years, I helped establish the LA UFO Research Group with some very esteemed people, a small group who met since the 1970s through today. Nevertheless, I come from an engineering background. I'm involved in computer science and embedded systems and software and control systems for a very long time. Worked in aerospace for Teledyne and for AeroVironment. And in between, the longest period of almost 16 years with Walt Disney Imagineering, where I created the systems that run all the audio animatronics used around the world, in some cases through today. As that all started from the French project, and many other things.
Could you let us know, how did you actually get involved in what you're doing now? Like, what motivated you to actually build these systems to be able to capture anomalies in the sky?
Well, in my experience at LAUFORG, each person in that group had a particular interest, as we all do. Mine was always, because of my background, I guess, in instrumentation. How could I capture actual data of scientific interest in the subject? And one of my earlier attempts was I built a device that could theoretically sit in the, say, the bedroom of someone who's thought they were abducted now and then, and wait and then start running a video camera with audio when something happened. And I built that, and I think it functioned, but I never installed it because of the obvious conflicts that could be of recording someone in their bedroom. We just didn't think that was feasible, but it was a good technical project. But along the way, what happened is that as of about 2014, things really got really interesting, even I suppose before that, in the terms of the ability of individual inventors and experimenters being able to acquire the electronics, computers, and especially free software development tools that could make something like this happen. I mean, before that, it was thousands and thousands of dollars, and it was pretty ridiculous. So then also, of course, recognizing the need for collecting scientifically useful data for ufology. As you know, before that, and to this day, for the last 70 years, just most of what the field has done, including MUFON and NUFORC and others, is collect case reports, right? Random people have random experiences with random equipment, with no history, no background, no calibration, no nothing, but they submit it, and that's really valuable. I mean, that got us all interested, right? That's why why we do what we do, but it's not of interest to science. You can't write a paper on that and get it submitted anywhere, right? So, and we are kind of not going to wait anymore for government agencies who undoubtedly have much better equipment than any of us could ever have, and have for a long time. They don't share, right? So do it ourselves. Let's collect the data. And today, because of the SCU and others, there's a great interest in actually doing science for ufology But the basis of science is always the collection of data to analyze, right? How do we do that? Now, Rob, you've been doing that with your rig. And so, but what I recognized was, in order to be able to make this happen in a way that is sufficient, we have to collect data from many locations simultaneously over a long period of time in very inclement conditions, because the equipment probably has to stay outdoors for a really long time, right? So it has to be weatherproof, environmental proofed, and most likely the place where the experimenter will be collecting that data, the computer, may have to be quite remote from the cameras and sensors and operating 24/7, 360, right? That's what UFODAP does. That's my direction. That was part of my requirements. Everybody has a PC, and the compute power there is vastly beyond the pie. So let's divide things up and let's create an architecture of these components that make sense, that do all these things. So the concept became, let's take off-the-shelf, high-end, reasonably high-end, but very capable pan, tilt, zoom, and fixed cameras that were Ethernet connected through routers or whatever means, put them on the internet or locally on a LAN, and then they're connected to a computer, which could be local or anywhere in the world, and it would control and collect the data. And from that came all the other things that came out of the architecture, which any of your viewers can see on ufodap.com or on the presentation that I presented at the SCU, which is identically what's on the homepage of ufodap.com.
We've got, I think there's something like 9 video cameras recording, sometimes all night long, and it's just too many hours to look through. And you responded and said, yes, you can use the software, and you can take all your files and you can have the software scan through them retroactively. So I know that some of the viewers, there's going to be 2 cases here at least. There's going to be a case where people would like to set up stuff that they can just leave. They can leave it all night. And as you're talking about, then there's other cases like me who are recording stuff, but then want to go through it later. Could you give me a rundown on how it would work so that, when I'm all done recording, I can have the software look for UAPs in all those videos?
Yeah, the current release of OTDAU, that's the Optical Tracking Data Acquisition Unit software. That's the thing that controls and records from the cameras I was mentioning. That's one piece of software that UFODAP provides. Just to mention, there's another one called Mission Control, of all things. It brings together from the internet up to 6 different DAUs, one DAU being an OTDAU. And there's also the other sensor device we can talk about later. But to answer your question, one thing OTDAU does is it has an analysis function. And it can be directed, it can be set up in advance so that it does one of 2 things. It either, every time a tracking sequence completes, OTDAU stores all the data. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of optional files it can create. The main one for this purpose being the raw data from the camera in an AVI file format. And it might record a number of those, but each tracking sequence, each time it detects and tracks and then stops doing that, the analysis software can, right after that, immediately analyze that AVI file. I'll get back to how it does it. But alternatively, more directly with what you're saying, it can be told to, you can select a folder that's at that top level or anywhere below it full of AVI files. And it will go through and down through the tree, find all the AV files and analyze them. The analysis is of 3 different kinds simultaneously that are selectable depending upon how much time you want to spend and the situation and so on. One type of analysis is a custom algorithm I wrote that looks at moving bright objects at night where there's probably no definition, but the object may be blinking. And what it's trying to do is analyze for the blink pattern, which is standardized on US and and world aircraft. And it, by the blink pattern, determines or estimates whether that could be an aircraft. And what it and like the other methods, it comes up with the determination aircraft and a probability measure from 0 to 100%. And it can also optionally automatically modify the file name of the AVI file and add that on at the end. So it might put at the end aircraft, or it might put on unknown.
Okay.
Now there's two other AI deep learning based methods which can be employed also, that know specifically, have been trained specifically on aircraft, birds, foliage, cars, and so on. I've eliminated a lot of them because we don't want to make mistakes and tell you something's a flying bathtub, but but since most things don't fly, I kind of limited it to birds and aircraft. I put cars in just because sometimes they're in the periphery. In any case, it will also analyze the files and label everything.
Mm-hmm. And what about bugs, Rod? That's a big thing we've run into, is bugs coming close to the camera.
Yeah, bugs.
A lot of people get those confused with something that might be a legitimate craft, right?
Right. Well, bugs and this kind of software, obviously I don't have a whole lot of tests with that. Typically they're labeled a bird or an unknown.
Okay.
The whole objective of this is very imperfect science, which all my software and hardware is all in constant development, and I issue releases every few months to add the latest bug fixes and features, only adding to everybody who ever got it. What I find is all that analysis software most typically labels an aircraft as a bird. But in any case, the point is to reduce the workload, which is exactly what your point is. What do you want to look at first? You've collected 500 files and you don't want to look through every single one. By the way, the analysis software also has a value I've discovered just by doing it, that if instead of, clicking through and opening each file and looking at it with VLC and closing it and all that, if I just point analysis to it and run it, it will go through, open each file automatically. I just sit there and look at it, and I can also tell it what percentage of confidence, the confidence level, 0 to 100%, that I want it to stop at. So if I typically tell it, when you feel that you've got a confidence of 50% or more, go on to the next file.
Like, why should a viewer seriously look into your system?
Because UFODAP is designed to be very modular and configurable. First of all, they can start with a really low-cost system. They can have just the OTDAU software and their own little webcams pointed out a window. I mean, that's feasible. It's $95 to do that if you already have a webcam.
Fantastic.
That's nothing. The next step up might be that on the website, by the way, there's the shop from the homepage. There's all kinds of, there are systems I put together, but there's also individual components, and I could consult with people to pick the best things. But they can collect data in that simple way. They could move up to a fixed IP camera. They could move up to a pan-tilt zoom camera, which automatically tracks and zooms. Mm-hmm. Then they can, if they had two such systems, whether they're fixed cameras or zoom cameras or whatever, and they had the mission control software, another $95, then mission control drags in the data from both cameras and does triangulation. Now they can track on a real-time Google map and record that, the altitude and position of the object and its size and velocity and so on. So,
and Ron, how far apart would you have to have the two systems in order to successfully triangulate?
Well, that's a complicated question, of course, and there's a mathematical discussion of that on a document in the download section you mentioned on the website. That's the installation guide. I believe there's some there, but the short answer is probably from 100 feet to a mile, something like that. The issue depends on what it is you're using to track with. If you're using pan-tilt zoom, the accuracy of pointing, the feedback that the cameras provide, and a lot of other factors kind of determine the resolution. So you can get certainly track. The measurement accuracy is, it's not like a government equipment, but it will be quite helpful. The bigger point is for the average person, if we want to have progress in ufology, a single point of view is maybe not adequate. If we have 2 points of view, whether those systems are coupled through mission control or simultaneously and separate, that's a big deal to have more than one eyes on target at the same time. And along that line, in addition, the MSDAU, MultiSensor DAU, which I designed, which is this thing. This thing, if it's part of a system or just separate, there doesn't have to be cameras involved. That thing records up to something like 15 different measurements. It has a GPS built in. It knows where it is. It sends that out. It has a real-time scanning RF receiver. It measures fluctuations in gravity and electromagnetic field all at the same time and sends those to mission control. And when coupled with a real-time sighting, you know, if some of the systems UFODAP is fielding ever do that, that's a big deal, right? You know, that has not happened before.
Absolutely. I mean, I take some of this equipment with me, but it's not really integrated. It's all spread out. But to be able to have an integrated system where it could overlay all the data, and it's more credible also because you've got sort of one place where it all goes. So there's almost no possibility that it's been hoaxed or faked. Whereas, you know, when you have separate devices, then it really comes down to the operator, believing the operator, whether he had them synchronized, you know, the dates and times in them. It's difficult. When you have it all under one roof, into one device, it's way better for credibility.
Yeah. And UFODAP system, all this data comes together either at mission control and simultaneously OTDAU records everything it has, even if it's connected to mission control or not. All that data is recorded and time-stamped and so on, geolocated. And, you know, that would be, I don't know how anybody would fake any of that. But because UFODAP is architected in such a way that all this data could be going to a researcher at a remote location, you know, the cameras and MSDAUs can be mounted anywhere, like and send that data on. Nobody touches those. You know, nobody interacts with them for good reason. You know, not just what you were just saying, but because you know you want to leave it for a long period of time and collect repeated instances, right?
If somebody wanted to do this, you offer consulting services with them. If they're not quite as technically savvy as you are, for example, you could help them set up this system from the technical point of view.
Yeah, sure. Consult with them. You know, the first thing is ask them questions like, "What are you going to do? What's your goal? What's your budget? You know, I mean, what are you trying to do?" Because, I mean, the system, as you've noticed, you know, it can look pretty daunting, but at the basis is pretty straightforward. And the important thing is to get things which will provide the most bang for the buck. For example, a clear discrimination might be maybe applicable in your case, since you know where you're looking. You know, maybe you don't need a pan tilt zoom camera even. I mean, there's a value in that. And OTDAU actually can combine a PTZ camera with a fixed camera. You know, the PTZ, it can be set up for a handoff. So anything it detects on the fixed camera initially, it will point the PTZ camera in that direction and say, okay, you go and make your own detection and start tracking and zooming. But you only need, maybe you start with just a fixed camera, which costs less. And also, by the way, because it's not trying to physically move anything, is faster. So it will capture very fast movements of birds and insects and UFOs. If you're familiar with the Discovery Channel Expedition X show, you're familiar with that? The last two of them featured my equipment, where they took to Catalina Island. They set up the camera, put it out on a bluff overlooking the ocean, and they saw some lights moving up and down, you know, and so on. And then, they got some footage that way.
Next question. Do you have a system, or is there a system where, as more and more people install this or set it up, that the data, you know, if they request or whatever, give permission, can go to a central spot, and it's all integrated with potentially other captures?
Well, that is something UFODAP wanted to do very much. That was part of the whole scheme from several years ago when we started up. But about a year ago, I kind of discovered each other, the UFO Data Project, UFOData.org, with some very, very great academic folks behind it, like Mark Roediger and so on. And they were trying to do the whole thing themselves. So I think they discovered UFODAP before I discovered them. And they said, gee, you've already built the equipment. We were going to do exactly the same thing. So I tell you what, why don't we, the two of us, the light bulb came on and said, gee, we should be doing this together. So we have a collaboration now where UFODAP provides the equipment and expertise or whatever to collect the data, store it locally, and so on. When it comes to analysis, they are building the website and database to do exactly that and provide this stable of experts to bring it all together and analyze it.
Well, what I really liked about your systems, Ron, is that somebody who's really entry level can take your equipment and is very inexpensive, like the software, and get started.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you see the camera that's behind me in the photo. That started out as one camera, a very simple P900 with zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And over the time, it's evolved, and it's even more elaborate than what you see in that picture now. I mean, that's the one that's on the tripod, but then I also have one that sits there that's not fixed. The one you see there, I can turn it around looking for things. And I'm also looking through your whole setup to see what I would take as another fixed setup that will just watch the sky.
Yeah.
And it will, the software will run and it will watch. So very likely within the next few months, I'm going to have 3 systems employed on every expedition we go.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody that's just getting into this can really go to your website and they can either order directly or they can contact you and get involved with a very simple system that can actually find and track UAPs.